It happened in less than 30 seconds. I was inside the kitchen, pouring my daughter's favorite strawberry smoothie when I heard her scream, a sound I'll never forget. Not the kind of scream a kid makes when they scrape a knee. This was raw, terrified, panicked. I dropped the glass. It shattered against the tile as I ran out the back door. She was coughing, wheezing, her tiny arms flailing at the air. Her wheelchair was parked near the edge of our flower bed, and standing 3 feet away, still holding the garden sprayer, was our neighbor, Mrs. Callahan. "Your daughter," she spat, "keeps ruining my begonias with that metal thing. I warned you. Now your weeds and your kid can breathe the same poison." I froze. My daughter was gasping, her eyes red and streaming, the mist still clinging to her hair like a cruel fog. I grabbed her and pulled her inside as fast as I could, dialing 911 with trembling hands. The dispatcher kept asking if it was an accident. No, it wasn't, because 2 days earlier, that same woman stood on our doorstep with a printed photo, a zoomed-in picture of our daughter's wheelchair tracks barely brushing the edge of her lawn. "She's trespassing," she'd said. I thought she was joking. I even laughed. But standing there now, hearing the sirens growing louder, watching my baby girl struggle to breathe through pesticide fumes, I knew something had broken. This wasn't about flowers. This was hate. This was punishment. As the ambulance pulled into our driveway and the EMTs rushed toward us, I remember looking up one last time at Mrs. Callahan. She hadn't moved, just stood there with the hose still dripping in her hand, staring at us like we were the criminals. That was the day our quiet little neighborhood turned into a battlefield. And that's the moment everything changed. Our daughter, our dream, and the garden we loved before the war with our neighbor began, before court dates and community meetings, before pesticide turned our lives upside down, we were just happy. We moved into Rosewood Creek 3 years ago, a quiet, perfectly trimmed HOA neighborhood just outside of Portland. Wide sidewalks, smiling neighbors, lawns that looked like magazine ads. It felt safe, peaceful, like the kind of place where our daughter could grow up without stares, without whispers. Her name is Ellie. She's 8, born with spina bifida. Doctors told us she might never walk, and they were right. But they never said anything about how strong her spirit would be. Ellie doesn't just live in a wheelchair. She owns it. Pink rims, glittery spokes, stickers from every zoo, museum, and aquarium we've ever taken her to. She calls it her sparkle machine. And every afternoon after school, she'd roll out into our backyard where the sun hit the garden just right and talk to the roses. Literally. She named them, told them about her day, played pretend with butterflies and whispered secrets into the petals. The garden was her escape. And that backyard, that little strip of earth between our home and the neighbor's flower bed, became a stage for joy. A place where disability didn't matter, where Ellie could just be. Our next-door neighbor, Mrs. Callahan, had lived in the house beside ours for over a decade. Retired teacher, HOA member. Every Sunday morning, she watered her begonias with military precision. She didn't wave much, never smiled at Ellie, but we thought maybe she's just old-fashioned, reserved. We had no idea. The first incident was small. A note, folded and slipped into our mailbox. "Please keep your child from disturbing the fence line. My plants are sensitive." We didn't think much of it. Ellie had brushed her wheelchair wheels against the edge of the fence once while chasing a butterfly. No harm done. We apologized in person and even offered to plant extra flowers on our side. Mrs. Callahan just nodded and closed the door. The second incident came weeks later. This time, a warning from the HOA. Complaint received. Child rolling onto neighbor's property. Disruption of lawn edge. Potential violation of community respect policies. That word, disruption, stung, as if Ellie's existence was something inconvenient. I called the HOA to explain. Spoke to a man named Richard. He was polite, but firm. "We just have to file every complaint. It's protocol." He promised it wouldn't go on her record. I wanted to laugh. Ellie was 8. What kind of neighborhood keeps records on children? After that, we noticed Callahan watching more. from behind her curtains, through her blinds, eyes like searchlights sweeping our yard every time Ellie played outside. One afternoon, Ellie came inside early, unusually quiet. "What's wrong?" I asked. She told me I was crushing her flowers. Ellie said, barely above a whisper. She said, "My wheels are poison." I froze. Who said that? The lady next door. We wanted to storm over, to yell, to defend our child. But instead, we tried the adult thing, the neighborly thing. My husband baked banana bread. I wrote a note. We walked over together and knocked. Mrs. Callahan opened the door, just a crack. We offered the bread, the apology, the olive branch. She took it silently. "She's a child." I said, "She means no harm." "I know what she is," Callahan muttered, "and your garden is overgrown." Then she closed the door. That night, I stayed awake staring at the ceiling. Something felt off. This wasn't about plants. This was about control. About something darker, resentment perhaps, maybe even fear. I thought about pulling Ellie from the garden, making her play indoors, keeping the peace. But the next morning, she wheeled out as usual, wearing a tiara and singing to her roses like nothing ever happened. So we let her be. We told ourselves this was America, our home, our yard, our child. She had every right to roll through the sun, laugh in the air, and live like every other kid on this block. We had no idea it was all building towards something unthinkable, because while we were planting joy, our neighbor was quietly growing hate. The tension didn't explode all at once. It crept in like a weed growing under the fence, slowly cracking through everything we thought was safe. It started with the flowers, more specifically, Mrs. Callahan's begonias. She had 2 neat rows that hugged the wooden fence between our yards, delicate, bright, and overly pampered. Every morning at 6 a.m., she'd be out there in a sun hat, humming a sharp tune, gently misting them like they were her children. Nothing could touch those flowers, not the wind, not the weather, and certainly not Ellie's sparkle machine. The first real clash came on a Tuesday. Ellie had just gotten home from school. It was one of her good days, no doctor's appointments, no leg spasms, no therapy, just sunshine and energy. She wheeled out with a cup of apple juice and her sketchbook, humming Taylor Swift and drawing bees in the garden. I was inside folding laundry when I heard a knock. 3 hard raps. When I opened the door, Mrs. Callahan stood there holding a Ziploc bag filled with dirt and what looked like a dead flower. "This," she said coldly, "was trampled. 2 inches of wool clearance is all it took." I measured. I blinked. I'm sorry. Are you saying my daughter ran over one of your flowers?" She veered onto the fence line. "It's unacceptable. I've already filed another complaint." I looked down at the bag. It was a weed. That evening, my husband checked the yard camera. Ellie had never gone near the begonias. Her path was at least a foot away from the fence. Still, we decided to move her garden chair back another 2 feet, just in case. We didn't want trouble. But trouble had already moved in next door. A few days later, our sprinkler heads were mysteriously cracked. The HOA sent us a warning: irrigation leaking into neighboring lot. A violation fee. We replaced the system. Then came the trash issue. Our bins, once collected without a hitch, were suddenly left behind on pickup day. When I called the city, they said the new HOA schedule had changed. Turns out, the update email never reached us. It had been accidentally removed from the mailing list. I began noticing other things. One afternoon, Ellie came in early again, her smile dimmer than usual. The lady told me not to roll past her flowers anymore. She said they're allergic to my wheels. My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" She said my wheelchair is metal poison. That night, I sat with my husband at the dining table and said the words I hadn't wanted to admit for weeks. "She's targeting Ellie." We tried documenting everything. Screenshots of complaints, photos of the fence line, copies of notices from the HOA. Still, no one in the neighborhood seemed to notice or care. When we walked to the park, other neighbors smiled but didn't stop to talk. No one waved back anymore. At the last HOA community event, Callahan stood surrounded by three other women. One pointed at Ellie's chair, whispering. We were being isolated, quietly pushed out. Then came the camera. One morning, Ellie came in and said, "There's a red dot on the fence." I went out to look. Sure enough, nestled among the begonias was a tiny blinking light, a motion sensor camera, mounted to catch the fence line, pointed directly at Ellie's garden path. We confronted Mrs. Callahan. "It's for my protection," she said, not even blinking. "Your daughter's metal wheels scratch my lawn ornaments, and I've seen her pick at the petals. She's 8," my husband said, trying to stay calm. "She sings to flowers. She doesn't destroy them." Callahan crossed her arms. "You people think sympathy gives you permission. You people?" She closed the door. That night, we filed a formal complaint with the HOA about harassment and surveillance of a minor. No reply. A week passed. Then 2. Nothing. But the camera stayed. Ellie stopped going outside. She stayed in her room. The sparkle machine parked silently in the corner. Her drawings of flowers replaced by blank pages. She wouldn't say much, just that her stomach hurt or her legs were tired. But I knew. She felt unwanted, unsafe. And still, part of me hoped it would stop there. That Mrs. Callahan had gotten whatever satisfaction she needed from bullying a child and would move on. But we were wrong. Because the next week, my husband found something strange near the fence. A plastic bottle hidden in the bush. Inside it was a leftover mix of what looked and smelled like pesticide. And that's when the real nightmare began. The day we found the pesticide bottle, something shifted in our home. My husband held it up with a gloved hand, nose wrinkled. "This smells like glyphosate. Roundup, maybe. Why is it here?" It wasn't on our property, not fully. It was tucked beneath the hedge right along the fence line, just a foot from where Ellie's wheelchair path used to run. The cap was loose, the liquid half empty. He looked at me. "Do you think she—" I didn't want to answer, but deep down I knew the truth. Mrs. Callahan wasn't just annoyed. She was becoming dangerous. We reported it to the HOA. Again, no response. So we tried calling the non-emergency line for the county sheriff. An officer came by, glanced at the bottle, and said, "Well, there's no camera footage of her pouring it, just the bottle being found. We can't do much unless something actually happens." Something actually happens. That sentence rang in my ears for days. Was that what they needed? A reaction? A child in the hospital? Meanwhile, Ellie began avoiding her sparkle machine. She stayed curled up on the couch, watching cartoons with the volume low. When I asked her if she wanted to go outside, she shook her head. "She watches me," she said, "even when I don't move." We began using the back entrance to leave the house, avoiding Callahan's property entirely. We pulled Ellie out of the neighborhood school and opted for home-based learning. Our world was shrinking, all because one woman couldn't tolerate a child's joy near her begonias. But the worst was still coming. One evening, around 7 p.m., I was cleaning up dinner when Ellie screamed from her bedroom. We ran in to find her crying at the window. "There's a sign," she sobbed. "Why is she calling me that?" We looked out. Nailed to the shared fence, right at Ellie's eye level, was a freshly painted wooden sign, "Private property, and no wheels, and no rollers, and no crushing." The word "no" was in bright red, underlined 3 times. The whole sign dripped with something sticky, like it had been painted in a fury. That night, my husband stormed over to Callahan's door. She opened it slowly, eyes blank. "You put that sign up? That's hate speech. You're targeting a disabled child," he snapped. "I'm protecting my flowers," she replied flatly. "You're tormenting a little girl." "I'm enforcing boundaries. If your child didn't roll like a tank, maybe she wouldn't kill living things." Silence. For a moment, I thought he might yell or even break down. But instead, he said something calm. "Controlled. We're pressing charges. And when this goes public, when everyone sees who you really are, don't say we didn't try to make peace." She didn't flinch. "I am peace," she said, and slammed the door. The next morning, our mailbox was smashed. Bent backward. Hammered, not hit. Deliberate. Then came the notice from the HOA. Multiple complaints regarding conflict between adjacent residents. You are hereby notified to remove all unauthorized play structures, i.e., child's wheelchair-accessible garden chair from the rear lawn. Failure to comply will result in fines. They had listed Ellie's mobility equipment as an unauthorized structure. We were stunned. I called the HOA president, a woman named Janice Cole, and demanded an explanation. Well, she said hesitantly, Mrs. Callahan submitted photographic evidence that your child's chair was parked beyond the garden path, which counts as structural placement on common boundary space. She's in a wheelchair. I said coldly. She was coloring. I understand your concern, Janice said, but we have to remain neutral in neighbor disputes. Neutral. That word nearly broke me. Because what do you do when neutrality means siding with the abuser? We decided enough was enough. We contacted a local disability rights attorney. We posted the signed photo online. And slowly, the story started spreading. A friend shared it with a parenting group. A disability advocate reposted it on Twitter. Then a small local news station called, asking for an interview. We weren't trying to be famous. We were trying to protect our daughter. But for every kind comment, we got 2 more from trolls saying things like, move if you don't like it, or the neighbor has the right to defend her yard. It was surreal. People debating whether Ellie's existence was inconvenient enough to justify chemical spray and wooden signs. We kept Ellie inside. We thought we were keeping her safe, but one afternoon, everything exploded. It was unusually warm that day, and Ellie asked if she could sit outside for just 5 minutes. We agreed, cautiously. Her father cleared the path. I stood watch from the kitchen window. Ellie wheeled out, wearing her sun hat and a fresh sketchbook in her lap. She sat beneath the cherry tree, humming softly, coloring bees again. Then Mrs. Callahan walked outside. I froze. She had something in her hand, a garden sprayer. She walked slowly along her flower bed, past the fence line, closer and closer to where Ellie sat. And then, without warning, she aimed the nozzle over the fence and sprayed. A cloud of mist arced through the air, right over the garden, right into Ellie's space. Ellie screamed, and everything we had feared, everything we had been told wouldn't happen, happened. I've replayed the moment in my head 1,000 times, sometimes in slow motion, sometimes like a nightmare on repeat. But the truth is, it only took 7 seconds. 7 seconds from the time Mrs. Callahan lifted the sprayer to the moment my daughter began choking. It wasn't just water. It wasn't even mild. The chemical mist came out thick, a sharp, noxious fog, drifting right over the fence, sinking onto Ellie's bare arms, her face, her sketchbook. I watched from the kitchen window, paralyzed. I don't even remember how I got to the door. 1 second I was staring through the glass, the next I was sprinting barefoot across the lawn. Ellie, she was screaming, coughing, rubbing her eyes. Her little fingers shook violently, trying to push her wheelchair back, but struggling to reach the wheels. I grabbed her, pulling her into my arms, my voice cracking as I shouted for help. My husband ran outside, phone in hand, already dialing 911. Behind us, standing calm as ever, was Mrs. Callahan, holding the garden sprayer like it was a toy. She was on the edge of my grass, she said, as if explaining spilled tea. I warned you. The EMTs arrived within 6 minutes. Ellie's skin had turned red. Chemical burns, they said. Her lungs were tight, her breathing shallow. Her eyes swollen. They gave her oxygen adrenaline. Loaded her into the ambulance like she was made of glass. I rode with her to the ER. She kept whispering through gasps, Mommy, did I do something wrong? Was I too close to her flowers? Am I poison? I broke. I told her no. 100 times. 1,000. But how do you explain to an 8-year-old that some people hate what they don't understand? That some adults carry a rage so cruel, they'll weaponize a garden sprayer against a child in a wheelchair? At the hospital, the diagnosis was chemical conjunctivitis, respiratory irritation, and first-degree burns on her hands and arms. The doctor asked if we knew what the substance was. We think it's Roundup or something like it. I said. He looked angry. That's not just garden spray. That's toxic, especially for children, especially in those quantities. Police were called. A report was filed. But that's when the system started its dance. The responding officer said unless we had video evidence of Mrs. Callahan intentionally spraying Ellie, it would be hard to press assault charges. Even with Ellie's testimony, the burns, the witnesses, it's a civil matter, they said. A civil matter? She attacked a disabled child, and they told us it was a dispute between neighbors. The hospital treated Ellie overnight. She cried herself to sleep in a bed that smelled like bleach and plastic. I held her hand until morning, whispering stories about rose gardens where no one ever got hurt. The next day, we returned home to something even worse. There on our front porch was a fresh HOA warning notice. Your family's recent behavior has caused unnecessary conflict and disruption within the community. Any further incidents may result in formal review by the board. It was our fault now. We had become the problem. Neighbors who once waved now avoided us completely. Cars slowed down as they passed our house. A mother pulled her child closer as we walked by on the sidewalk. And Mrs. Callahan? Still watering her flowers, still sipping her tea, still sleeping peacefully at night while my daughter had nightmares. We tried everything, filed restraining orders, sent letters to local disability groups, even contacted a journalist we knew. The online story gained traction. News outlets began calling, but Callahan remained silent. Not once did she apologize, not once did the HOA reprimand her. Instead, they held a meeting not to support us, but to remind homeowners to keep community matters private and avoid fueling media drama. They wanted us quiet. They wanted our daughter invisible again. But Ellie refused. 2 weeks after the incident, bandages still on her arms, she asked if she could go outside. I hesitated. Are you sure? She nodded. I want the sun back. So we rolled her out, this time on the other side of the yard, nowhere near the fence. She wore sunglasses, gloves, a scarf, like a little astronaut in her own backyard. She lifted her sketchbook and drew a bee, then a rose. Then, for the first time in weeks, she smiled. Not because she forgot what happened, but because she refused to let that woman take everything from her. And that's when I realized we weren't just fighting for safety. We were fighting for dignity. For every child in every suburb who's ever been told they don't belong. For every parent who's had to explain why the world can be so cruel. For every little girl with wheels instead of legs who just wanted to draw flowers in the sun. After the incident, our front door turned into a battlefield. We had news vans on the street within 48 hours. Microphones, boom mics, flashing cameras. All because one tweet, a picture of Ellie's blistered arms and the caption, HOA neighbor sprayed a disabled child with pesticide for getting too close to her flowers. It exploded. 20,000 retweets. Then 50. Then CNN called. Then disability rights activists. Then lawyers. For a moment, the silence that had been suffocating us cracked open. But it came with a cost. The HOA responded immediately, not to apologize, not to help, but to defend themselves. They released a public statement. The Rosewood Creek HOA deeply regrets the situation and is working with both parties to resolve the matter. We remain committed to fostering a respectful and inclusive community. The words incident disabled child and pesticide were never mentioned. Callahan? She lawyered up. Her legal team claimed she was simply spraying her own flowers and that any exposure to Ellie was accidental crossdrift. Crossdrift, as if chemicals blew into our yard on a gentle summer breeze, and not because she aimed a sprayer over the fence at a child. Our lawyer, Daniel Reyes, wasn't having it. He filed a civil suit against both Mrs. Callahan and the HOA for harassment of a disabled, minor violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act, emotional trauma, physical injury due to negligent chemical use. We weren't after money. We were after justice. A line in the sand that said, this isn't okay. But the legal system moves like molasses. Meanwhile, Ellie's life had changed. She no longer drew bees or roses. She now drew fences, barbed wire, sprayers, sometimes just angry red clouds with crying stick figures in wheelchairs. We started therapy, both for her and ourselves. Ellie cried often. At night, at random, loud noises triggered her, and every time she heard a hose click on, she panicked. The neighborhood remained divided. Some neighbors sent us anonymous cards. "We're sorry. We believe you. She's a monster." But none of them stood up publicly. At the HOA meeting held 2 weeks after the spraying, we were invited to air our concerns. I brought photos, medical records, a letter from the hospital. Mrs. Callahan sat 3 chairs away, stone-faced, her attorney at her side. When I finished, the room was silent. Then someone from the board said, "We encourage both parties to consider mediation." I laughed, out loud. Mediation? I asked. She sprayed poison on a child. Allegedly, another board member muttered. I looked at them all, clean shirts, HOA pins, clipped smiles, and I realized they didn't want resolution. They wanted quiet. They wanted order. They wanted the news vans gone. So we went louder. Ellie and I agreed to do a televised interview. She sat beside me, holding my hand, her sleeves pulled up just enough to show the healing burns. She looked into the camera and said, "I didn't hurt her flowers. I just wanted to play in my yard. I love flowers." It broke people. The video racked up over 3 million views. Suddenly, there were protests in front of the HOA office. Signs read, "Wheels are not a crime. Let her draw in peace. Justice for Ellie." Local officials took notice. A disability advocacy group filed an ADA violation complaint against the HOA. A city councilwoman visited our home and promised to ensure accessibility rights were taken seriously in residential communities. Pressure mounted. A month after the interview, the HOA president resigned. Mrs. Callahan? She didn't. But something finally happened. A restraining order was granted. She was no longer allowed within 100 feet of our daughter or our property. Then came the trial date. It wasn't criminal, not yet. But the civil case was strong. Multiple witnesses, medical records, the online footage. A neighbor even came forward and admitted seeing Callahan aim the sprayer over the fence. Callahan's lawyer tried to argue she was an elderly woman protecting her flowers. Our attorney replied, "From an 8-year-old girl in a wheelchair?" The judge didn't smile. By the end of the hearing, the ruling was clear. Ellie would receive a settlement to cover medical costs, therapy, and emotional damage. Mrs. Callahan would pay damages and issue a formal written apology. Under court order, the HOA was fined for violating ADA guidelines and forced to update community policy to include protected access rights for disabled residents. The ruling wasn't perfect, but it was something. When we came home that day, Ellie was quiet. "What do you feel?" I asked. She thought for a second. "Like the flowers are growing again. We planted new ones that weekend. Purple coneflowers, bee-balm, sunflowers." Ellie picked each one. Her sparkle machine rolled down the garden path again, sunlight bouncing off her rims. She looked at the fence and whispered to her sketchbook, "Not afraid of you anymore." And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about HOA drama. This wasn't just about one angry woman with a sprayer. It was about every kid who gets told they're too much, too loud, too visible. Ellie didn't want revenge. She just wanted her son back. And she got it. Some scars fade with time. Others settle in like shadows, soft, but always there. Ellie's burns eventually healed. The redness gave way to pale lines on her arms. Her breathing returned to normal. The panic attacks? Less frequent now. But the fear that took longer to loosen its grip? We never thought our daughter would become the face of a movement. We never expected strangers to send letters from across the country, cards from Kansas, artwork from Germany, even a hand-drawn poster from a wheelchair basketball team in the UK that read, "Ellie, keep rolling. You're stronger than flowers." Those moments helped. They reminded us that the world, though cruel in pockets, was still filled with kindness. Real, loud, and overwhelming kindness. But for Ellie, the real healing began somewhere smaller. In the garden. She hadn't touched her sketchbook for weeks. Then one quiet afternoon, I found her outside, under the cherry tree, knees curled to her chest in her chair, sun hat tilted to the side. The sketchbook sat open on her lap, a crayon in her hand. She was drawing. It wasn't flowers this time. It was her, a little girl in a pink wheelchair, arms stretched wide, head tilted toward the sky. Next to her was another figure. It looked like me. I blink hard. "What are you drawing, sweetheart?" She smiled faintly. Us. When everything was still okay. I knelt down beside her, heart heavy and full all at once. "You know what?" I said. "I think we're okay now. Maybe not the same, but stronger." She nodded, her eyes still fixed on the paper. "I want to plant the butterfly bush again," she said softly. "The one near the fence. The butterflies used to love it." I hesitated. That was the very spot we'd avoided, the one too close to her yard, too close to bad memories. But Ellie wasn't asking for safety. She was asking for courage. So we planted it together. That week, she started talking to her flowers again, giving them names, telling them jokes, playing flower school, where the daisies were her students and the tulips were always late. And something amazing happened. Neighbors began to speak up. One brought over lemonade. Another dropped off flower bulbs for Ellie's garden. A retired veteran who'd lived 4 doors down knocked on our door and said, "I've been in this neighborhood 20 years. I should have stood up sooner. I'm sorry, and I'm proud of her." Even the HOA, now under new leadership, invited us to consult on their new community inclusion program. Ellie's case had rewritten their bylaws. The new rules included disability access standards, anti-harassment clauses, and even a kindness garden grant to help families create inclusive play spaces. But the most powerful change? It was in Ellie. At the next school art fair, her painting was titled, "I Am Not a Weed." It showed a bright pink wheelchair surrounded by sunflowers, dandelions, and roses, all blooming from its wheels. Her art teacher told us Ellie explained it like this: "Some people think I ruin their garden, but I make my own kind of flowers." That one sentence broke every heart in that room, including mine, because it reminded us all of what had been forgotten. Ellie never wanted conflict, never wanted courtrooms or cameras. She just wanted to draw, to roll, to play. That's it. She just wanted to play. So we built her a little wooden sign next to the garden, the same place where Mrs. Callahan once posted hate. Only this one says, "Welcome to Ellie's garden. Please smile. The flowers are listening." The sun hits it perfectly around 10 a.m. That's her favorite time to roll out and say good morning. You won't believe what happened next. Just when we thought it was over, when peace had finally settled back into our lives, another letter arrived in our mailbox. This one wasn't from Mrs. Callahan. It was from her daughter. A handwritten note, soft blue ink, folded carefully and sealed in an envelope that smelled faintly of lilac. Inside, she wrote, "I want to apologize for my mother's actions. She's not well, but I also need to warn you, she's filed a new claim, not just against your family, but against the HOA for emotional distress. She says she was the real victim." Ellie's wheelchair creaked to a stop beside me as I read the letter aloud. She looked up at me and whispered, "Is she coming back?" I didn't know how to answer. Because what do you do when someone refuses to change, even after the world sees who they really are? That, dear viewer, is a story for another time. But we promise you will want to hear what happened next. So if you believe in kindness, if you believe every child deserves safety, subscribe to our channel Backend Index Pointing Right, HOA, Denied Access, and help us keep telling stories that matter. Speech Balloon drop a comment for Ellie. She reads, "Everyone, bellhop bell hit the bell, because the next chapter is coming soon and it's unbelievable."